So, in social psychology, we need to think about how we relate to other people and how they relate to us, and how we are affected by others and how we affect them. So, the first thing we need to think about when talking about others is how we think about others and why we think that. So, there's something called the Attribution Theory. And this is the idea that when we're talking about other people, we typically attribute their behavior, meaning we try to explain their behavior in one of two ways. We either say, well, that's just their personality, or we say, well, that's just because of the situation that they're in. So we either attribute their behavior by their personality, we're also going to call that internal dispositions, or the external situations that they're in. So if you were to see someone in class, you typically are like, oh, well, they're like this and that and the other, and you'll give characteristics talking about their personality. They're shy, or they're talkative, or they're smart, or they're outgoing, something like that. And so that's typically a personality characteristics. Those are the internal dispositions. Sometimes you have to focus on the external situations as well, like, they're always busy, or they seem to be stressed about other things, or they are really in a good mood because this is happening. So both of those are in play. So here's an example between Jack and Julie. And we all know people like Jack and Julie. Jack and Julie are both in your AP psychology class, and Jack is a cut-up. He is loud and he's always has something to say, always has some little anecdote to share, and typically the class clown. Julie, on the other hand, she's a little quiet, a little reserved, quite shy. And you typically would just say, well, that's just the way Jack and Julie are. Jack's internal disposition, his personality is he's a extrovert. He's a class clown. He's a cut up. And Julie, she's an introvert. She's shy and she's just quiet and reserved. Well, that's a problem that we make, is that when we attribute people's behavior to either their internal disposition or their external situation, we tend to not put those in the same, we don't typically put the same weight on those. Typically, we make something called the fundamental attribution error, where we actually put more emphasis on people's internal dispositions more on their external situations. So we tend to focus more on people's personality as opposed to the situation that they're in. Because it's very possible that Jack and Julie aren't so cookie cutter, extrovert and introvert, class clown versus the shy kid. It's very possible that, there's a situation that they're in or that's causing their behavior. So for Jack, the reason that he's a cut up, maybe it's right after lunch and he's full of sugar. Maybe the reason that Julie's so shy is that it's first period and she's still really tired from working, late at night. Maybe Jack is trying to, be funny in class because he's trying to get the attention of the girl that sits next to him. Maybe Julie is shy because all of her friends are in another class period and she's really talkative around them, but she's not so much here. So, we tend to make an error when we focus on people's internal dispositions and we completely forget about their external situations. So you just can't forget about the external situation that they're in. You don't know the environment that is causing them to behave in a certain way. We tend to think about actors in movies. Oh, well, the reason that this person plays a good, bad guy is that they're really dark and twisty inside for real. Not necessarily. They're actors reading, lines that were written for a character. They're just because a person keeps playing a bad guy in a movie or keeps playing, the typical, like surfer guy, or a woman who's always like cold and frigid, doesn't mean that she's going to be like that or he's going to be like that in real life. We typically forget about the external situation of they are actors, and we forget and we tend to focus, the reason that they're having that part is their personality is really close to that, so it's not much of a stretch. Or maybe they're just doing their job. Same thing about teachers. You probably have an idea of the teachers that are outgoing versus the teachers that are not. The teachers that are straight-laced versus the teachers that are just all over the place. But it's very possible that they're also putting on some sort of performance. I mean, you're seeing them at school, at their job. It's very possible that if you run into teachers outside of school, as awkward as that is sometimes, that they're completely different, and you completely forget about the external situation and tend to only focus on the internal disposition. So that's how we explain others. How do we explain others? By making that error, that fundamental attribution error. But when it comes to explaining ourselves, we do just the opposite. When we explain our own behavior, we do the self-serving bias. We're a little bit biased when explaining our own behavior. That makes sense. So if one of your friends is grumpy, maybe not even a friend, maybe an acquaintance. You walk into class and you say hi and they make some sort of like snap at you. You're going to probably think they're rude. You're going to blame their internal disposition, their personalities, that they're just not a nice person. But if you were to snap at someone in the same way that they snapped at you, you're going to think to yourself, well, I'm not a rude person. I'm just really tired. I'm just really stressed. So when talking about others, we put all of the weight on their personality and none of the weight on the situation. But when talking about ourselves, we typically put all of the weight on the situation. That's not who I am. I'm just stressed. I'm just tired. I'm just hungry. And then you completely forget about maybe that's just your personality. Maybe instead of, I cut someone off in traffic, oh, that's because I'm late, or I'm running late, or whatever. Maybe it's just because you're a bad driver. Because when people cut you off in traffic, they're not running late, or they don't have a bee in their car. They're a bad driver. But if you do the same thing, oh, you just didn't see them, and I wasn't paying attention. I'm a good driver. Typically, I'm a good driver. Are you? Or are you just in fault of the self-serving bias? Same thing about married couples. If a married couple is happily married, and the husband comes in late and throws his suitcase on the ground and kind of storms off and plops himself on the couch, though a wife might ask, honey, you seem stressed. How was your day at work? You seem like you had a bad day at work. So because she's in a good marriage, she's going to say that there's something wrong here with her husband, but it's because of the situation that he's in. But if she was in a bad marriage and the same thing happened, husband storms in, throws a suitcase on the ground, plops himself in front of the TV, she might think to herself, that's his personality. I made a bad choice. He's not a very good husband. He's not very nice. She might forget that there's a situation here. So the fundamental attribution error, it has a lot to do not only with what we're talking about, but like who we're talking about and how well we know the person. Okay, so does what we think even matter? Because if what we think apparently is not always right, if we tend to forget only the external part, we only focus on the internal disposition part, do what we think even matter? Yes. So I want you to think of an attitude that you have, not like a attitude, whatever, but more like a belief, an idea that you have, an attitude that you have on, the attitude you have for exercise, or the attitude that you have against cheating, the attitude that you have against or for certain things that people are, for and against. Because attitudes are just beliefs and feelings that predispose our reactions to objects, people, and events. So your attitudes towards politics, religion, diet, family, lots of different things that they are attitudes that we have, feelings that we have that make us react certain ways to certain people and events and so forth and so on. So let's think of an attitude that everyone has. Not everyone. I don't want to, oversimplify things, but an attitude that a lot of people have is that cheating is wrong. Cheating is wrong. And I'm just going to blanket statement cheating is wrong. So do our attitudes guide our actions? If you think cheating is wrong, does that guide your actions? Yes. If several things are in line. Outside influences on what we say and do are minimal, meaning that there's no pressure to cheat. I didn't say cheating on a person. I didn't say cheating on a test. I didn't say cheating on your taxes. I just said cheating in general. But there's a lot of pressure to cheat on homework, especially if you're in the top 10%, because that rank says a lot of things about you, and a lot of schools will accept you just based on rank alone. So the pressure to have high grades is pretty high. Most of the cheating is done in the top 10% of the class versus the bottom 10% of the class. Bottom 10%, they're not cheating. The bottom 10%, they're not even trying. They stopped trying a while ago. That's why they're in the bottom. So the outside influences on what we say are minimal. So if you believe that cheating is wrong, but there's influences, outside influences that put pressure on you to cheat, even though that you hold the idea that cheating is wrong, that might not guide your actions. It only guides your actions if you believe that to be true and no one's pressuring you to go against that. Attitudes are specifically relevant to the behavior. So specifically relevant, meaning that I said cheating is wrong. Some of you might have heard that as cheating on tests are wrong. You might have heard that as cheating on your spouse is wrong. I just said cheating is wrong, but there are many forms of cheating. Lying is a form of cheating. Cheating on a daily grade is a form of cheating. Cheating on a major grade, cheating on your relationships, cheating on your spouse, cheating on your taxes. Those are all forms of cheating. But it's very possible that you might think those are different severities of cheating. Like, oh, I would never cheat on my spouse or on like taxes or something, but like a homework, I'm going to cheat on a homework. So it has to be specifically relevant. You can't just say cheating is wrong, because that's such like a blanket statement for that to apply to everything. It needs to be a little bit more specific, like cheating on daily grades. Cheating on tests, okay, fine. Cheating on tests, I won't do that. Cheating on my spouse, I won't do that. So it has to be specifically relevant, and it has to be an attitude that's not so gray. It's kind of black and white, because once it's gray, then you can bend it either way. And that we're keenly aware of our attitudes. If you don't know what your attitudes are about a certain thing, you don't have feelings about a certain thing, how is it ever going to guide your actions? If you don't have an opinion, how are your opinions going to guide what you do if you don't even know what your opinions are? So believing a certain thing will only affect you if there's no pressure for you to go against it. You know exactly what you're thinking, your opinions are, and those opinions are pretty specific. They're not going to be vague ideas like stealing is bad. It's like stealing food to live. That's more specific and something that's a little less gray. Okay. How do we persuade others? So let's say that we have an idea. I have a feeling, I have an attitude about something that I want others to have as well. I want to persuade them to think what I think is correct. There's several ways that you can persuade someone. 2 ways, really. There's the central route to persuasion and the peripheral route to persuasion. And unfortunately, one of these works a little bit better than the other. So the central route to persuasion involves being persuaded by the argument alone, the content of the message. So, when you are having a debate, let's say that you're in some sort of debate and you are trying to persuade someone with facts and data, that is the central route. You are actually persuading someone by the content of your message, by the words that you are saying. The peripheral route is everything else. It is anything but the message that you're using to persuade. So in the presidential debate between Nixon and Kennedy was the very first presidential debate that was televised. It was also on the radio, but a lot of people tuned in for the first time to watch it on their TVs at home. And what's funny is that depending on if you listened to it on the radio or if you watched it on TV, people thought that different candidates won. The people that listened just to the message, because that's all they could hear, because that's what they listened to on the radio, they were just listening to the message and the central root of persuasion, they thought Nixon made a very valid argument that he won. He won that debate. But the people that watched it from TV said, no, Kennedy won that debate because look at him. He looked presidential, young, handsome, and Nixon was known to sweat a lot. With the heat from the lighting, he was sweating a lot. So he'd answer a question, but then like tap his brow to like wipe the sweat off. And people thought that made him look nervous and unsure and like he was hiding something. It had nothing to do with the content of the message, but the people that saw it, they saw the peripheral root. They saw everything else besides the content. They saw the way that they stood, the facial expressions that they made, exactly what they were wearing. And that changed. It's very possible that it changed the course of the election. So, can we be persuaded? We can persuade others using either the content or everything else, but can we be persuaded? Do our actions, do what we do, affect our attitudes? To how we behave, affect what we think? Yes. Okay. So there's a couple of phenomenons that I think are quite interesting that we can persuade others and that people they use to persuade us. One is called the foot in the door phenomenon. So let's say that you want to borrow money from your parents. Foot in the door phenomenon is how you do it. You ask, foot in the door. Think about what that means. You're trying to get your foot in the door. You're trying to get a little bit of you in the door, and eventually you can wiggle your way in. So you're going to ask for money from your parents that you know, such a small amount, you know they're going to say yes to. And when they say yes to a small amount, they're more likely to say yes to a larger amount later. So let's say that you wanted $20. You're not going to go just directly, well, some of you may, but if you really want to use psychology to benefit you, you're not going to go straight to them and say that you want $20. You're going to go and say that you want something small. Hey, can I borrow like $3? Because who's going to say no to $3? So you're going to say something small. And then once they agree to that, they're more likely to comply and to say yes to larger requests later. So you start with something big, something small, and then you work your way up to something big. This is a great way to teach your children, to like swim. You don't start, you have your kid at the side of the pool. You don't start 50 feet back and say, jump in and swim my way. No, you start right there at the very edge of the pool. You have them jump in. But as soon as you jump in, then, which they already have, they've already complied, they've already jumped in, they're in the water, you start backing up. And eventually they're going to swim to you. Eventually. Chinese POW camps. This was in the Korean War that these American soldiers got captured by the Chinese and were put in POW camps until the war was over. And this is not a torture camp. They were not tortured, but they were told to do small, simple things. At first, it was like, move these rocks to that pile and then move these rocks to that pile. Nothing big. And then it was, do my laundry. It was write, communism is the best 100 times in a row. And over the course of years that they were in the POW camps, it just got to be greater and greater and greater. Eventually, when the POW camp was shut down and the Americans were allowed to go home, the majority of them stayed. They stayed there. And they honestly believed in interviews that communism was more superior than democracy because they had written it thousands of times. And they had the Chinese just gotten their foot in the door asking for small requests and then eventually getting much larger ones later. The other way to do this is something called door in the face. It's exactly the opposite. It doesn't work quite as well as foot in the door, but door in the face is just as good. This is asking for something so very large that you know they're going to say no to. So when you ask for small requests, it doesn't seem as bad as the larger one. So once again, let's say you want to borrow $20 from your parents. You're not going to ask for $20. You're going to ask for 100. And they're going to say no. You're expecting them to slam the door in your face. No. Ask for a large request. They're going to say no. And then you're like, well, then can I have 20? Well, you wanted 20 to begin with. And so you ask for something that's so large that you know is going to be thrown down, but then you ask for something smaller, the thing that you really wanted, and they're more likely to say yes to that because it's not as big as before. Okay. When we get back into class, we're going to talk about how role-playing, how an action that you do of role-playing, whether it be joining the military or going to college, or when you put on a new role, when you put on a new title for yourself, how that affects your attitudes. Because we just said our attitudes can affect our actions if certain things are in play. But now the question is, can our actions affect our attitudes with role playing? And we're going to find out that yes, it can.